In the world's largest democracy of the Republic of India, more than 1.666% of its population travels by train every day. That's like the entire population of the country of Australia. In the world's third largest economy of Japan, the share of railway travel is 5 times that of the airline, the second most used. And before it was invented by Richard Trevithick, there was a man who created an important steam engine in the development of this very thing. Studio 78.104 presents 52 Weeks, 52 Scientists, Season 1, Episode 35, James Watt, Fellow of the Royal Society. He was born on 19th January 1736 to James Watt, a father, and mother Agnes Muirhead. His father worked in various positions while his mother was highly well educated, at least for the time. He was born in the city of Greenock in Renfrewshire and was the eldest of the 5 surviving children. So he had 4 other surviving siblings at the time. Moving on, let's talk about the family. So there's a blot on the James Watt family. His family was closely associated with the slave trade, and most of their fortune came through this ungraceful activity. The products made by the slave trade and the slave trade itself earned a majority of the fortune of the Watt family before James Watt publicly renounced it a few years later when he stayed in Jamaica and used to be also was a slave owner. He grew up a Presbyterian with a part of the convental movement, but later became deist. This is according to reputed sources. However, the extent to which this is true and the extent to which he was either deist or atheist is still hotly debated. He left Greenock for Glasgow, a large city in Scotland, as he felt that Greenock was limiting his scientific capabilities, and so he went to Glasgow to create a mathematical instruments thingy. Now, his mother, Agnes Muirhead, died when he was just 18, and he was devastated. Then he left for London, where he got a small job, but he had not much success making instruments out there. His real taste of success came when instruments bequeathed from Alexander Macfarlane came from Jamaica. This was the boost he needed. He was then allowed to set up a small workshop at the University of Glasgow, forming friendships with Joseph Black and economist Adam Smith. He'll come later on in the video, so remember that name. Anyways, he had 2 wives. One of them was his cousin Margaret Peggy Miller, who he married for 9 years. And then there was Anne McGregor, who he married in 1775 and was married to until his death. But there is a little side note here. Anne McGregor died way later in 1832. Talking about other things, there's the kettle story. Now, you might have heard of the story. The infamous story, it goes something like this. This is a popular story that Watt was inspired to invent the steam engine by seeing a kettle boiling, the steam forcing the lid to rise, and thus showing Watt the power of steam. The story is told in various forms, and sometimes he's older, sometimes a young lad. Sometimes it's his mother's kettle, sometimes his aunt's. Well, he did not actually invent the steam engine as the story implies, but dramatically improved the existing Newcomen engine by adding a separate condenser. This is difficult to explain with someone not familiar with the concepts of how heat works and thermal efficiency work, and this story was created possibly by his son, but like Isaac Newton's apple story, it's somewhat true. And even though it's dismissed as a myth, he did actually look at a kettle, and kettle it was used as an equipment in his lab where he tried to form some experiments. However, whether that was done with his mother or aunt is not true, and certainly not at a young age. So it's not fully a myth actually, which is very important to note considering a lot of stories are myths. Anyways, John Robinson highlighted to him the use of steam as motive power, and here is where our story really takes off. Then, Watt was asked to repair the Newcomen steam engine, the first steam engine created by Thomas Newcomen. Even after repair, the engine barely even worked. Energy was wasted because this instrument used repeated heating and cooling. 75% of the universe of the energy was going to waste, only occupying 25% of it, which seems really wasteful. So he set out to create a workable design for the steam engine. Now here's where our story drifts to the part where he talks about the steam engine. Now the thing is, he needed capital to do all of this, and so he set out to find sponsors. His first sponsors came in form of two men, and these men were Joseph Black, his friend that we talked about earlier. I told you to remember him. And also John Roebuck, the founder of the Caron Iron Works. They pumped money up. However, there was a slight thing. The thing was that, you really can't get gold workers and iron workers in particular at that period of time. And soon enough, his sponsors went bankrupt. However, there was some light and some hope here as his patent was approved. So, good job, and it was also extended. Because he did not have money, he had to take up jobs, something that he hated. He did not want to work at a job, but he had to work as a surveyor as well as a civil engineer. These were his two and only jobs, as he did find a sponsor later, and a sponsor that was indeed very famous. Yes, I am talking about the celebrated Matt Bolton, who owned the Soho Manufactory, the Lunar Society. He paid money to obtain patent rights for the work that our boy had already done, and so he was off working out it all again. He now got access to some of the best iron workers of the entire world, which was certainly a great benefit considering he didn't have it before. And the Walt Bolton partnership was wildly successful. It was very successful, and this comes up later on. Now let's talk about the first engine. Let's talk about it for a while. In 1776, the first engines were installed and working in commercial enterprises. These first engines were used to power pumps and produced only reciprocating motion to save the pump rods at the bottom of the shaft. And for the next 5 years, he installed engines, and just mainly installed engines in Cornwall for pumping water. These early engines were not manufactured by Bolton and Walt, but were made by others according to drawings made by Watt. He just served in a design purposes, who served in the role of consulting engineer. The erection of engine and its shakedown was supervised by Watt at first and then by men in the firm's employ. These were very large machines and had a diameter of some 50 inches and an overall height of about 24 feet. And it actually saved 33% of the coal that was going to waste earlier. For the next 6 years, Watt just went on improving and modifying this engine, fitting it in places and places. This is about 11 years from when it was first created, or about 1787. Now let's talk about a court case. This court case is the three court case where there was a Hornblower brothers and Mr. Edward Bull, who were also creating their own steam engines. Now Bolton and Watt didn't like that their patents were being infringed on, and so they sued. And they sued for £21,000, which is £2 million right now. Then he made another invention. So this was actually a really interesting invention that doesn't get as much credit as other do. This is the copying machine. So there was no good method for creating copies of letters or drawing. Just use multiple linked pen or just trace it. So this was very cumbersome. He created a machine that would essentially print, that would do the medieval equivalent of photocopying. And so he created the portable copying machine, which is as small as a laptop. Well, I would be impressed if I were in the 18th century. During his career, he was a big correspondent, so he wrote a lot of letters. He also did not like bargaining. He had a general hate for business affairs, which he didn't want to get into. Still, he had to sell his stuff, and but he did not like actually doing it. He wrote a lot of letters, and finally, he gained a lot of respect as one of the founding members of this organization. Later on, his son received the lower amount of respect, but let's talk about that later. He also created a sculpture machine. Now, this machine would make sculptures and medallions of basically whatever you wanted. And so this could make anything. He never patented this, and the first thing that made West was a small hair of his old professor Adam Smith, who was also his friend. Told you had to remember those names earlier? Well, that's why here. He created this sculpture machine, and his work later on, after his steam engine was so wildly successful, revolved mostly around creating things that could make art faster. So I think artists also owe him a mention. For the next 10 years, he basically did little stuff, including traveling to France and Germany and traveling on a paddle steamer. He died on 25th August 1819 at his home, Heathfield Hall, near Handsworth in Staffordshire. Here's where he died, and that was a sad day for the history of science as a whole. I, I guess, and I think that. And he was also a Freemason. Search of Freemasonry. It's really complicated. I'm not gonna get into that. Also because of copyright reasons. He was part of the Glasgow Royal Arch Lodge number 77, and he had his own lodge made. I guess good for him. Honestly, I don't want to get much more into it. He was a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which is the most important scientific honor given out in the United Kingdom, and thus he is now in the same echelon as people like Newton. The standardized international unit for energy is known by no other name than what? 5-watt chargers? Well, you can give him the name for 5-watt chargers or 8-watt adapters or whatever you want to call it. Now let's talk about the Bank of England. So I told you that Matthew Boulton was important, and here's why. The Bank of England issued a £50 note in which on the reverse, because you obviously can't show anybody else other than the Queen on the front, there's him and Boulton with their quotes inscribed. Now there's Alan Turing on the same note. He was also part of the Scottish Engineering Hall of Fame, one of the first 7 inductees. I tried to contact them, but that was to no avail, or else I would have taken an interview from them. Still, this is another pretty big achievement. He is one of the greatest engineers ever. To make the steam engine an important part of the Industrial Revolution, which accelerated human development and made humanity go leaps and bounds, must be credited in a huge part to the one and only Thomas James Watt. Thanks for watching, and thanks. Here's the citations. Go check him out, I guess. The citations list is pretty long. Anyways, this was produced by me at Studio 78.0.